This is possibly the most consequential military development since the Iraq War, but because the speed at which things are moving is genuinely difficult to keep up with. Every time I think I've got a handle on the situation, something new breaks. So here's where we are right now, and I'll walk you through exactly why the C-17, a cargo plane most people couldn't pick out of a lineup, is at the center of one of the most intense military operations the United States has launched in 2 decades. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military campaign against Iran called Operation Epic Fury. Nearly 900 strikes in the first 12 hours alone. And yes, that number is accurate. I checked it multiple times. The opening wave killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei directly, along with dozens of senior Iranian officials, and simultaneously targeted missile systems, air defense networks, and IRGC command infrastructure across Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, and Karaj. This wasn't a warning shot. This was an opening that was clearly designed to decapitate an entire government before it could react. Now here's where the C-17 comes in, and this is the part that fundamentally reframes what you're watching on the news. Before a single bomb dropped, U.S. Air Force transport crews had already been running the largest airlift operation since the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Open-source flight tracking data shows more than 110 C-17 Globemaster III aircraft had already arrived in the Middle East, with additional missions still underway. Some analysts were tracking as many as 112 at peak, all of them carrying something. Air defense systems, precision-guided munitions, spare interceptor missiles, the newest search and rescue helicopters in the American arsenal, the HH-60W Jolly Green II, were unloaded from C-17 cargo holds at forward bases across the region. And it took 73 of these flights just to move a single Patriot air defense battalion from the Pacific to the Middle East. 1 battalion, 73 flights. That's the scale of what's happening right now, and most people aren't even aware of it. Pull back from the individual aircraft numbers, and you start to see this is really about the infrastructure of modern war, and how the United States has been building it in plain sight for months. The airlift surge began in mid-January and never slowed. Between January 18th and January 26th alone, the Air Force flew at least 41 C-17As and 1 C-5M Super Galaxy into the region. The flights originated from bases in Germany, the United Kingdom, and the continental United States, flowing into Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, CENTCOM's forward headquarters, and Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, where F-15E Strike Eagles had been quietly accumulating since early in the year. This was structured planning, not a scramble. Someone had a calendar and a checklist, and they were working through both methodically while negotiations were still nominally ongoing. That's the detail that stops me cold. Because on February 25, just 3 days before the strikes, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was publicly saying a historic agreement with the United States was within reach. Oman's foreign minister, who had been mediating, briefed Vice President Vance on what he called an imminent nuclear deal. And then, on February 28th, the bombs fell anyway. I want to know if you're connecting the same dots I am. What does it tell you that an airlift of this scale was already in motion before the talks formally collapsed? Drop your read on this below. I'm genuinely curious how people are interpreting that timeline. So let's talk about what the C-17 is actually doing in this operation, because the aircraft itself is a story worth understanding. Each C-17 Globemaster III can carry over 77 tons of cargo. That's a stripped-down M1 Abrams tank, 3 Bradley fighting vehicles, or 102 fully equipped paratroopers in a single trip. It's designed to land on short, rough runways, refuel in flight, and operate from austere forward bases that would ground most commercial aircraft. In a conflict theater with contested airspace and limited infrastructure, the C-17 is the reason anything else can function. Without the airlift, there are no replacement interceptors when missile defense batteries run low. Without the airlift, there's no forward positioning of precision-guided munitions before a strike campaign kicks off. Without the airlift, the 6 U.S. service members killed in the opening phase of Operation Epic Fury, Captain Cody Cork, Sergeant First Class Noah Teachins, Sergeant First Class Nicola Moore, Sergeant Declan Cody, Major Jeffrey O'Brien, and Chief Warrant Officer Robert Marzan wouldn't have come home the way they did. Their remains arrived at Dover Air Force Base on a C-17, where President Trump attended the dignified transfer ceremony. The same aircraft that carries warfighting capacity also carries the fallen. That's not a contradiction. That's what total war logistics actually looks like. Now layer this on top of what's unfolding in real time. South Korea, watching the interceptor stockpile crisis deepen across allied nations, rushed 30 ballistic missile interceptors to the UAE, transported by C-17, virtually overnight. Several European Union member states have warned at closed-door meetings that a global shortage of interceptors is becoming a serious constraint on Allied defensive capacity. Bloomberg reported those concerns are being raised urgently across Allied capitals. Meanwhile, the U.S. is quadrupling bomber strike power over Iran. B-52 Stratofortresses, each capable of carrying 30 massive precision-guided bombs in a single pass, are now operating from newly activated forward bases that put them closer to Iranian targets. Defense analysts describe B-52s going over an industrial complex as being able to flatten the entire facility in one run. That's the next phase of this campaign. And the C-17s are what's making it possible, by moving the bombs, the fuel, and the crews into position before the B-52s ever leave the runway. Here's where the picture shifts significantly, and this is the part I think most coverage is missing entirely. This conflict isn't just a military operation. It's a stress test of the entire Western logistics ecosystem. One of the clearest signals came from the head of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, who told the Senate Armed Services Committee that American military Sealift is operating at roughly 60% of actual requirements, with 17 combat logistics warships currently out of service for lack of manpower. His words, "When the unforgiving hour comes, the only ships we will be able to commit to areas to put into harm's way will be gray ships." That testimony was about the Pacific, but the strain being placed on strategic airlift by the Iran campaign is pulling resources from every direction simultaneously. The C-17 fleets being surged into the Middle East aren't materializing from nowhere. They're being redirected from global availability pools that were already stretched. And that's before you factor in the Iranian counterstrikes. Tehran launched hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at U.S. bases and allied infrastructure across Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. An Iranian drone struck a high-rise tower in Dubai. The CIA station in Saudi Arabia was described in reporting as taking a direct hit. The Strait of Hormuz, through which more than 20% of the world's oil passes, effectively shut down, with ship traffic coming nearly to a complete halt. Oil prices are moving globally. Lloyd's of London is being pulled into conversations about political risk insurance for maritime trade. The economic blast radius of this conflict is expanding faster than the military one. Where does it go from here? That's the question I've been sitting with, and I don't think there's a clean answer. But here's what the evidence suggests. On March 1st, Trump announced the U.S. had accepted an Iranian proposal for further negotiations, while simultaneously stating that operations would be completed within a 4-week timetable. Those two things are in direct tension with each other. Iran's foreign minister publicly rejected ceasefire framing, invoking the regime's resistance during last June's Operation Midnight Hammer, and when asked whether Iran feared a U.S. ground invasion, replied, "No, we are waiting for them." Iranian President Pezeshkian, however, separately said Iran will no longer attack neighboring countries or launch missiles unless an attack on Iran originates from those countries, which reads as a de-escalatory signal, however cautiously worded. These two voices are not saying the same thing, and that internal tension inside Tehran's response is going to matter enormously for what comes next. CENTCOM's framing has been unambiguous. A spokesperson stated that the two most powerful air forces in the world are dominating the skies over the world's largest state sponsor of terror. Iranian ballistic missile retaliation has reportedly decreased by 90% since the opening phase. The Iranian Navy has been largely wiped out. The operation's stated objectives, preventing nuclear acquisition, destroying missile infrastructure, degrading proxy networks, eliminating naval capacity, are being checked off methodically. But the intelligence picture on what actually remains of Iran's nuclear program is contested. The CSIS assessment is careful. Iran had roughly 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium before the strikes. Whether the Parchin military complex, struck twice since February 28th, actually housed the critical remaining capacity is still being analyzed by open-source satellite imagery. There's also a wild card that nobody is publicly accounting for in full. the Iran-China-Russia Trilateral Strategic Pact, signed on January 29, 2026, just weeks before the operation began. It's not a mutual defense treaty, but it provides diplomatic cover, intelligence sharing, and what reports describe as Russian agreement to rebuild Iran's air defense systems after this campaign ends. China has reportedly been providing satellite imagery of U.S. force deployments to Iranian counterparts. The long game here doesn't end when the last bomb drops. And that's a calculation the C-17 crews currently flying 18-hour missions into the Gulf theater probably don't have the luxury of thinking about right now. Here's what I keep coming back to. The United States spent roughly $779 million in the first 24 hours of Operation Epic Fury alone. The pre-strike buildup, the months of C-17 flights, the carrier group repositioning, the ground asset deployment, cost an estimated $630 million on top of that. That's over $1.4 billion before the third day arrived. And that spending rate is not slowing. Defense experts consulted by Al Jazeera were explicit that it's too early to project total costs because, as one senior fellow at the Stimson Center put it, there are a lot of moving pieces. What we do know is that interceptor stockpiles are depleting faster than they can be replaced. Logistics infrastructure is being strained globally, and the economic disruptions, energy prices, maritime insurance, regional commercial flight routes, are compounding daily. The C-17 crews that people are barely thinking about right now are the ones keeping this machine running. They're the reason bombers can fly more sorties. They're the reason allied nations have interceptors when Iranian drones come over the horizon at 2 a.m. They're the reason the fallen come home. And the fact that there are over 100 of them currently operating in this theater, drawing on airlift capacity that was already stretched before this began, tells you something important about the ambition of what's being attempted, and the risk embedded in attempting it at this scale. Where do you think this lands? Not just this week, in 6 months. Because right now, there are two completely different endgames being described by people who should know. One version: Iran's military capacity is degraded to the point where a negotiated settlement becomes the rational choice for whoever is left governing in Tehran. The other version: this campaign creates a vacuum that becomes a generational instability problem, with China and Russia positioned to fill it. I've got a lean, but I want to hear yours first.